and welcome to China's Living Legends.
欢迎来到我的频道。
Look out across the landscape. See the mountains and rivers stretching to the horizon. Now imagine shaping that landscape on a colossal scale.
Yeah, building structures so immense they become symbols, etched into the very earth for millennia.
Exactly. We're talking about things like the Great Wall, the Qin Strait Road. These aren't just engineering feats. They're like the fingerprints of empire.
And behind these monumental efforts, there were individuals, real people whose lives were caught up in the ambition, the power, and, let's be honest, the brutality of building something that big.
Today we're taking a deep dive into one such figure, Meng Tian. He was absolutely central to the early days of unified imperial China, serving under the legendary first emperor Qin Shi Huang.
Right. Meng Tian wasn't just a celebrated general, though he was definitely that. He was also a master builder, but his story, it's also one of political intrigue, conspiracy, and ultimately tragedy.
So we're going to trace his path. From, pushing back nomadic raiders in the north to orchestrating the construction of these epic defensive lines and supply routes.
And we'll wrestle with the complex ways history has remembered him. Was he this loyal, brilliant servant? Or maybe someone who enabled a tyrant?
Yeah, and then we'll pull back the curtain on the conspiracy that destroyed him. It's a really dramatic sequence involving ambition, betrayal, and a rather surprising ancient belief about disturbing the earth itself.
It's a story that offers a truly sharp look at how power, loyalty, and, the consequences of a grand ambition intersected right at the very foundation of one of history's greatest empires.
Think about figures today involved in huge, sometimes controversial national projects, or individuals navigating the incredibly high stakes of political power. Meng Tian's story, even centuries later, still gives us this potent window into that world.
And the human cost, really. The human cost of building empires.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our journey with Meng Tian really begins on the northern frontier, doesn't it? That's where he seems to have forged his reputation as a military leader.
It is, yeah. You have to paint a picture of what that border looked like for the Qin state before the empire was unified.
Right, so we're talking late Warring States period, just before Qin Shi Huang brought everything together.
Exactly. For centuries, the states in the Central Plains had faced constant pressure from nomadic groups to the north. The most prominent among them were the Xiongnu.
Xiongnu. Highly skilled horsemen, right? Very mobile.
Incredibly mobile. And they frequently raided across the border, causing significant disruption. A particular point of vulnerability was the Hetao region, that big loop the Yellow River makes.
Okay, I know the area you mean.
If the Xiongnu controlled Hetao, they were uncomfortably close to the Qin heartland and the capital, Xinyang. It was a persistent, really difficult security challenge.
So once Qin Shi Huang completed the unification, bringing the 6 warring states under a single banner, securing these vast new borders, became like priority number 1.
Absolutely. And dealing with that northern threat was paramount.
Makes sense.
Precisely. After establishing the empire, one of Qin Shi Huang's first major moves was turning his attention north. In 215 BC, just a few years into the empire, he made a decisive decision. He appointed Meng Tian to lead a force on a scale rarely seen before.
How big are we talking?
300,000 troops.
Wow. 300,000 troops. That's an enormous undertaking. How did Meng Tian even approach this first major campaign against the Xiongnu?
Well, Meng Tian proved himself a highly capable commander right away. He led this massive army north from the capital region, marching through areas like Xiongnu. His tactics were flexible and very effective.
How so? What did he do differently?
He didn't just rely on infantry, you see. He was excellent at coordinating different units, combining solid infantry lines with swift cavalry charges, and even chariots still played a role.
Combined arms?
Exactly. This combined arms approach allowed him to quickly confront and defeat the main Xiongnu forces that were operating in that crucial Hetao region.
And what was the immediate result of that campaign? Did it work?
A clear victory for the Qin. Meng Tian successfully reclaimed the territory known as south of the river, which is basically the southern part of that valuable Hetao loop.
Okay.
The Xiongnu chieftain at the time, a leader named Tuman, he saw the sheer size and the operational effectiveness of Meng Tian's army.
He must have been intimidated.
You'd think so. Rather than risk further direct confrontation, he chose to retreat far northwards. reportedly moved some 700 a huge distance, just to put space between his forces and the Qin army.
So it wasn't just a single battle, it was more like a strategic maneuver that cleared them out of a huge, vital area.
Precisely. And Meng Tian didn't just win the battle and leave. He followed up the military victory by establishing Qin's control over the secured territory.
How did he consolidate those gains then? Secure that new frontier?
He pushed the Xiongnu further back into the northern deserts, essentially clearing the area south of the Yin Mountains. What had been contested borderland became integrated Qin territory.
And that new territory became a formal part of the empire. Officially.
Exactly. The land that Meng Tian had reclaimed was quickly organized and integrated into the standardized administrative system of the Qin Empire. It became known as Zhuang Commandery.
Zhuang Commandery, okay.
This represented a significant expansion of Qin's direct control into the north, and it was a major strategic victory. It greatly reduced the immediate pressure on the capital region from Xiongnu raids.
So this campaign really cemented Meng Tian's reputation as a top-tier general, capable of handling huge forces, achieving big strategic goals.
Absolutely. It put him on the map, so to speak.
That makes perfect sense for his military fame. But, like you said, when most people hear the name Meng Tian, they think of construction, right? Building things.
Yeah.
After this success in the north, the emperor gave him another task, one of truly epic scale.
He did, yeah. Having secured the Hetao region militarily, Qin Shi Huang then assigned Meng Tian the responsibility for a monumental infrastructure project, consolidating and expanding the northern defensive walls.
Ah, the Great Wall. So there were already walls there.
Yes, various states like Qin itself, Zhao, and Yan had built sections of walls along their northern borders during the Warring States period. They were sort of patchy, disconnected.
Okay.
The emperor wanted to connect these disparate sections, integrate them into a unified system, and extend them to create a single, continuous defensive barrier.
And this is the project that becomes the basis for what we now call the Great Wall.
Precisely. Under Meng Tian's supervision, this massive project resulted in the formation of the 10,000-mile Great Wall. It stretched an immense distance, from Lintao in the far west all the way across to Liaodong in the east.
That's just staggering to think about, the manpower involved.
It was a massive undertaking involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers and conscripted civilians. They weren't just building new walls, they were linking up existing ones, fortifying strategic passes, building beacon towers for communication along the entire length, a huge logistical challenge.
It wasn't just a symbolic line in the sand then. It was designed as a functional defense system.
Absolutely. The goal was to create a barrier that would make large-scale nomadic incursions incredibly difficult, if not impossible. It channeled movement through specific, heavily guarded passes and allowed for much more efficient stationing and deployment of troops along the border.
Right. So it significantly eased the constant burden of small-scale border defense for the Qin army.
Exactly. It freed up resources, theoretically.
And the building projects didn't stop with the wall, did they? I mean, to support this vast defensive line and the newly acquired territory, you'd need some serious infrastructure.
That's right. Think about it. You've got a huge army stationed way up in the north, a massive construction project underway, and this vast new territory to administer all hundreds, maybe thousands of kilometers from the capital.
You need roads, fast roads.
You need a reliable way to move troops and supplies quickly. So Meng Tian also oversaw the construction of what became known as the Qin Straight Road.
Draw a straight road. That sounds, well, exactly like what it was.
It pretty much was. An incredible feat of engineering for the time. A road roughly 700 kilometers long that ran remarkably directly from the capital, Xianyang, north, to the new Zhuang Commandery, where the wall and the army were based.
How did they make it so straight? The terrain isn't flat.
No, definitely not. To achieve that straightness, they had to level mountains and fill in valleys and ravines. It was a massive earthwork project in itself, almost as demanding as the wall in some way.
Just incredible. And its purpose was purely strategic. Military.
Primarily, yes. Its main function was speed and control. It allowed the Qin government to rapidly deploy troops and transport supplies to the northern frontier, crucial for maintaining control over that distant region and supporting both the military garrisons and the wall construction.
It sounds like the central nervous system connecting the capital to the northern edge of the empire.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And Meng Tian wasn't just a general and an engineer, though. You mentioned he was also involved in developing and settling this northern frontier.
That's an important point. His role went beyond just military conquest and construction. To further stabilize the region and integrate it into the empire, Meng Tian also supervised the relocation of inland civilians to the Hettao area.
Bringing people up there to live.
Yes, but these settlers weren't just farmers in the typical sense. They were often organized as garrison farmers.
Garrison farmers. So they farmed the land, but were also part of the defense structure somehow.
Exactly. They would cultivate the land to produce food and resources for the troops and workers stationed on the frontier and the wall, which was vital. But they also created a settled population base in these border regions.
Ah, so it boosted food production and put more loyal Qin subjects on the ground.
Right. It helped boost agricultural output, increase the Han population density in what had been sparsely populated or contested areas, and it facilitated regional development. Over time, it even contributed to a degree of ethnic integration as settlers interacted with existing local populations.
So his work truly encompassed military command, grand-scale engineering, and aspects of civil administration and frontier development. He really was a figure of truly immense capability during the Qin's early years.
He really was a multi-talented driving force behind the emperor's vision.
So a brilliant, effective, multi-talented man who was seemingly indispensable to the emperor's grand vision for the empire. Now, while he's most famous for the north, was his influence felt in other parts of the empire as well? Did he get involved down south?
It seems likely, though the records are less detailed than his northern work. Qin Shi Huang was also determined to expand the empire to the south, conquering the Lingnan region.
Lingnan. That covers modern-day Guangdong, Guangxi, parts of northern Vietnam.
Exactly. That campaign happened around 214 BC, so pretty much concurrently with some of the northern activities.
Who were the main commanders in the south? Was Meng Tian in charge there too?
Generals like Ren Xiao and Zatuo are usually credited as the primary leaders of the southern campaigns against the various Baiyu tribes. They were the ones leading the main push. However, some historical accounts suggest that Meng Tian may have played a supporting role, perhaps serving as a deputy or a high-level advisor, assisting in the military operations, and crucially, the subsequent consolidation of Qin control in the south.
So even if he wasn't the overall commander, his involvement at a high level would have been significant. And like in the north, he likely helped establish the administrative framework after the conquest, getting things organized.
That's highly probable. Just as he was key in setting up Juyi and commandery in the north, it's likely he contributed to implementing Qin's standardized administrative system, the commandery county structure in the newly conquered southern territories like Nanhai, Guilin, and Shang.
Bringing that centralized administrative model to the south would have been absolutely crucial for binding it to the empire, wouldn't it?
It was fundamental, and beyond just administration, figures like Meng Tian would likely have been involved in introducing aspects of Central Plains culture, agricultural techniques, and fostering interaction between the Han settlers moving south and the indigenous southern populations.
A long process, I imagine.
Well, absolutely, a very long process. But the foundations laid by the Qin in establishing their authority and systems in the south were vital for China's later territorial expansion and cultural development in that region.
So whether as a primary commander or a high-level advisor, his influence likely extended across both the vast northern and southern frontiers of the early empire. He really sounds like a truly pivotal figure in shaping the physical and administrative reality of the Qin Empire.
He really does. Hard to overstate his importance in those early years.
But his story isn't purely one of achievement, is it? There's a complex historical judgment on his life. A darker side, or at least a more controversial side.
There absolutely is. And the most influential judgment, the one that echoes down through history, comes from Sima Qin, the great historian who compiled the records of the Grand Historian much later, maybe a century or so after these events.
Okay, Sima Qian. And he was writing after seeing the Qin Dynasty collapse pretty quickly and brutally, right? So that probably colored his view.
Definitely. He witnessed the consequences of Qin rule firsthand, or at least the immediate aftermath. And he was quite critical of Meng Tian, despite fully acknowledging his capabilities as a general and builder.
What was Sima Qian's core criticism of Meng Tian then? What was the problem?
Sima Qian's argument is really rooted in morality and statesmanship. He felt that after Qin unified the realm, the people were utterly exhausted. Years of constant warfare, immense hardship. They needed relief.
Makes sense.
As a celebrated general, someone with the emperor's ear, Sima Qian believed Meng Tian had a duty to advocate for the welfare of the people. He should have advised the emperor to, temper his ambitions, alleviate suffering, focus on social harmony, let people recover.
And instead, Sima Qian argues.
Instead, Sima Qian saw Meng Tian as essentially enabling Qin Shi Huang's tyrannical tendencies. By throwing himself into these massive, incredibly costly and labor-intensive building projects, the Great Wall, the Straight Road, projects that required immense human suffering and exhaustion.
Right, the things we just praised him for building.
Exactly. Sima Qian felt Meng Tian was simply catering to the emperor's grand, destructive desires rather than serving the greater good of the populace. He wasn't pushing back.
That's a pretty harsh view. He essentially blames Meng Tian for going along with the emperor's potentially oppressive agenda.
He does. Sima Qian famously concludes that because Meng Tian accommodated the emperor's ambitions in this way, his eventual execution, along with his brothers, was not undeserved. He dismissed any notion that their deaths were due to supernatural reasons or fate.
Wow, not undeserved. That's strong.
It is. To Sima Qian, the reason they met a tragic end was their failure to act as wise, compassionate advisors when they had the opportunity and the influence to do so.
So, while acknowledging the military genius and the building prowess, Sima Qian's criticism boils down to a moral and political failure in his eyes. A failure of duty to the people, not just the emperor.
Precisely. But it's important to stress, Sima Qian wasn't blind to the achievements. He fully acknowledged Meng Tian's significant military victories were essential to consolidating Qin's unity and securing that northern frontier.
Okay.
And he also recognized that Meng Tian's strategies for frontier defense, his engineering marvels like the wall and the straight road, they became important models and precedents for later dynasties. So it's a nuanced critique. Acknowledging the accomplishments while laying heavy blame for the political and moral choices made under a tyrannical ruler.
It really forces you to think about that question, doesn't it? How much responsibility does an official bear for the policies of a ruler, especially if that ruler is despotic? Even if the official is highly capable and loyal to that ruler.
It's an enduring dilemma, isn't it? Meng Tian was undeniably effective at the tasks given to him. He appears to have been fiercely loyal to Qin Shi Huang.
But was it his obligation, as a high-ranking figure, to push back, to offer counsel that prioritized the people's welfare over the ruler's grand projects, even if it meant risking imperial disfavor, or worse?
Sima Qian clearly believed that was his duty, and his failure to do so, in Sima Qian's view, was a significant moral lapse that ultimately contributed to his downfall. Which brings us to the dramatic and, well, dark turn in Meng Tian's story, his downfall. And it really is a classic tale of high-stakes palace intrigue, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The entire political landscape just shifted violently, suddenly, with the death of Qin Shi Huang in 210 BC.
He died away from the capital, right, on a tour.
Exactly. Unexpectedly, while on a grand tour. This created an immediate power vacuum, which was very quickly exploited by powerful figures at court. The two main conspirators were Zhao Gao, a highly influential eunuch.
Zhao Gao always seems to be involved in these plots.
He's a key figure, yes. And Li Si, who is the prime minister, a very powerful man in his own right.
So these two plotted to control the succession, to choose the next emperor.
Precisely. Qin Shi Huang had designated his eldest son, Fusu, as his heir. Now, Fusu was serving up on the northern frontier, overseeing the army and the Great Wall project.
Working closely with Meng Tian.
Exactly. They had a close relationship. Meng Tian was effectively serving alongside him. Zhao Gao, driven by his own ambition, wanted to install a younger, far more controllable son named Hu Hai on the throne instead.
And Li Si, the prime minister.
No.
Why would he go along with this?
Li Si was concerned about his own position under Fusu. He had alienated Fusu with some of his previous policies, notably the suppression of scholars, the book burnings. Li Si feared Fusu might replace him, or worse.
So self-preservation for Li Si, ambition for Zhao Gao.
Pretty much sums it up. They decided to intercept the emperor's will, which named Fusu, and forge a new one.
Just intercept the emperor's last command. That's incredibly risky.
Hugely risky. That was the core of the plot. They manufactured a false imperial decree. This forged edict instructed Prince Fusu to commit suicide, accusing him of disloyalty, and, crucially, it also ordered Meng Tian to commit suicide.
Take out the heir and his most powerful supporter in one go.
The plan was clear. Eliminate the legitimate heir apparent and his most powerful military supporter, the guy who commanded the largest, most battle-hardened army in the empire.
And how did Zhao Gao, the eunuch, manage to convince Li Si, the prime minister, a man of immense power himself, to participate in such a dangerous act of treason? Li Si must have known the risks.
Oh, he did. This is where Zhao Gao's manipulative genius really comes to the fore. When Zhao Gao first proposed the scheme to Li Si was reportedly appalled. He called it treason, outright refused, said such a discussion was beyond their place as subjects.
So he resisted initially.
He did, but Zhao Gao was prepared. He knew Li Si's fears and vulnerabilities intimately, and he played on them masterfully.
How did he break Li Si's resistance then? What did he say?
He used this powerful persuasive technique described in the histories as making 5 comparisons. He directly challenged Li Si to compare himself to Meng Tian in 5 critical aspects, systematically highlighting Li Si's weaknesses and just how precarious his position would be if Fusu became emperor.
Okay, walk us through these 5 comparisons. What were they?
First, Zhao Gao asked Li Si, "In ability, how do you compare to him?" This immediately put Li Si on the defensive. Meng Tian commanded hundreds of thousands of elite troops, oversaw these colossal projects. Li Si's power was entirely bureaucratic, based on the emperor's favor, administrative authority. He had no independent military base, no leverage outside the palace.
Point 1. Military power. Li Si has none, Meng Tian has tons.
Okay. Second, Zhao Gao asked, "In achievements, how do you compare?" He contrasted Meng Tian's concrete, undeniable military victories and grand building projects with Li Si's achievements, which, as we mentioned, included policies like the burning of books, policies that were controversial, unpopular with many, and could easily be seen as liabilities under a new ruler, especially if Fusu favored scholars.
Point 2. Legacy. Meng Tian's looks solid, Li Si's is problematic.
Right. Third, in strategic foresight without error, how do you compare? This highlighted Meng Tian's consistent success and reliability in executing the emperor's plans, implying Li Si might be prone to political missteps or lack Meng Tian's steady hand in navigating future challenges, particularly the turbulent succession.
Point 3. Reliability. Meng Tian is proven, Li Si maybe less so.
Fourth, in popular trust, how do you compare? Meng Tian commanded respect among the vast northern army and had that strong connection with the heir apparent, Fusu, through their time on the frontier together. Li Si, known for his harsh legalist policies, was likely much less popular, and crucially, Fusu was known to distrust Li Si precisely because of those policies. Meng Tian's relationship with Fusu made him a direct threat to Li Si's future influence.
Point 4. Popularity and trust, especially with the heir. Meng Tian wins again.
And finally, perhaps the most devastating comparison. In closeness and favor with the crown prince Fusu, how do you compare? This hit Li Si right where he was most vulnerable. Zhao Gao knew Li Si's standing with the heir was weak, shaky at best, while Meng Tian had clearly bonded with Fusu on the frontier. This starkly illustrated Li Si's lack of access and influence over the man who was supposed to be the next emperor, cementing his precarious future under Fusu.
Wow. So Zhao Gao just systematically dismantled Li Si's confidence, showing him exactly how much more powerful and connected Meng Tian was, particularly if Fusu took the throne.
Exactly. Each comparison chipped away at Li Si's resolve, emphasizing his lack of military power, the potential political cost of his past actions, and his extreme vulnerability to a new ruler who clearly favored his rival. Faced with this barrage, Li Si had to concede. He reportedly replied, "None of these 5 aspects match Meng Tian."
He admitted it. So how did Zhao Gao deliver the final blow to secure Li Si's cooperation? What sealed the deal?
Having cornered Li Si with the 5 comparisons, Zhao Gao then appealed to his deepest, most primal fear, the historical fate of high-ranking officials in the Qin state.
The tendency for powerful people to meet bad ends in Qin.
Precisely. He reminded Li Si that very few meritorious ministers or generals in Qin had ever managed to die a natural death or pass on their honors to their descendants. He pointed out how often powerful officials were purged, their careers ending violently, their clans destroyed.
A grim history.
Very. Zhao Gao then highlighted that the late emperor had over 20 sons, implying that political purges were a constant danger under any potential successor, not just Fusu. He framed alliance with Zhao Gao and their chosen heir, Huhai, as Li Si's only realistic path to survival and protecting his family line.
It was a chillingly effective appeal to pure self-preservation. Forget loyalty, forget duty. This is about survival.
It was. Zhao Gao successfully convinced Li Si that his position was utterly untenable under Fusu, and that aligning with the plot was his sole chance for security. Manipulated by this dark, pragmatic logic, terrified by the prospect of his own and his clan's destruction, Li Si finally agreed to cooperate.
And with the prime minister on board, providing that crucial legitimacy, the fate of Fusu and the Meng brothers was sealed.
Yes. Li Si's participation gave the forged imperial decree the necessary authority to be carried out. The plot could now succeed.
So, the conspiracy works. The younger son, Hu Hai, is placed on the throne, becoming Emperor Qin Shi. What happens next to the Meng brothers? Does the new emperor act immediately?
With Hu Hai installed, the conspirators wasted absolutely no time. Meng Tian and his brother Meng Yi, who was also a high-ranking official, the governor of the capital region, were seen as the most significant obstacles, the biggest threats to the new regime's power.
Right, they had loyalty to Fusu, and Meng Tian had the army.
Exactly. Qin Shi, acting on that forged decree and the constant urgings of Zhao Gao and Li Si, was determined to eliminate them both.
Now, the original decree ordered Fusu and Meng Tian to commit suicide. Fusu tragically complied immediately. Did Meng Tian also take his own life right away?
No, that's an important distinction. Fusi did, sadly. Seems he believed the decree was genuine. But Meng Tian, perhaps more suspicious or simply more resistant, maybe questioning the order, did not commit suicide then and there.
So what happened to him?
He was subsequently arrested and imprisoned along with his brother, Meng Yi. However, the plot really required the removal of both brothers, so their fate was pretty much sealed regardless of that initial hesitation.
But there was one voice raised against their execution, wasn't there? Someone tried to intervene.
Yes, there was a dramatic intervention by Xing. He was actually a nephew of the new emperor, Hu Hai. He stepped forward to make this passionate plea for the Meng brothers' lives, using historical examples to warn Hu Hai of the dangers of what he was doing.
What historical precedents did Xing cite? What was his argument?
He drew lessons from the very recent past, specifically the failures of other states during the Warring States period. He reminded Hu Hai of the state of Zhao, whose King Qian unjustly killed his brilliant general Li Mu.
Li Mu, a famous general.
Exactly. After Li Mu was gone, Zhao employed an incapable man named Yan Zhu, and the state was swiftly destroyed by Qin. He also mentioned King Jian of Qi, who executed his loyal ministers, and favored a sycophant named Hu Sheng, which led directly to Ti's rapid downfall as well.
So Xing's message was stark and clear. States destroy themselves when their rulers discard loyal, capable officials and replace them with, well, yes men and incompetents.
Precisely. He argued that the Meng brothers were like the essential pillars of Qin. To execute them unjustly overnight, killing loyal servants while promoting the untrustworthy, would completely erode confidence and trust among all the court officials and, crucially, utterly demoralize the army out on the frontier. It was a powerful argument based on very recent, very relevant history.
A logically sound warning, you would think. Did Emperor Qin Shi listen? Did it have any effect?
Tragically, no, he did not. Under the heavy influence of Zhao Gao and Li Si, Emperor Qin Shi ignored Xing's counsel entirely. He was set on eliminating any potential threat, any remnant of loyalty to Fusu.
So the executions went ahead.
They did. Meng Yi was executed, and then Meng Tian, identified in some accounts as holding the post of governor of the capital region at that point, also met his end. He was ultimately forced to commit suicide in prison.
So, despite a reasoned appeal citing historical disaster, Xing failed to save the Mengs. Why do you think his argument fell on such deaf ears? Why didn't that historical logic work?
It really speaks volumes about the fundamental nature of the Qin regime at that exact moment, doesn't it? Xing's argument, while logical from the perspective of traditional statecraft, the idea that good rulers cherish loyal ministers, perhaps didn't fully grasp the reality of Qin's hyper-centralized autocracy as it was then evolving under the influence of Zhao Gao and Li Si.
Meaning the rules had changed.
In a way, yes. In this kind of system, the ruler's will, especially when manipulated by ruthless figures like Zhao Gao, was absolute. No individual, regardless of their talent, their fame, their apparent indispensability, even someone who commanded the main army or built the Great Wall, was truly safe or irreplaceable.
Anyone could be discarded.
Anyone could be discarded effortlessly if they were perceived as a political liability or an obstacle to the ruling faction's power. The emperor's determination, fueled by the conspirators' fear and ambition, simply overrode any appeal to historical precedent or reasoned statecraft. The system itself allowed for it.
A chilling reminder of how absolute power can just disregard even the most obvious historical lessons. So, Meng Tian is facing his final moments in prison, forced into taking his own life. What were his last thoughts, his final words before he died? Do we know?
We do, and it's an incredibly poignant moment captured in the historical accounts, particularly by Sima Qian. Facing the envoy sent by the emperor to deliver the final order, Meng Tian initially tries to reason. He reminds the envoy of his family's generations of loyal service to Qin, his own immense achievements for the state. He pleads for a reprieve, asks for reconsideration.
But the envoy wasn't moved.
No, the envoy was resolute, the order stood. Knowing there was no escape, Meng Tian makes this powerful declaration just before he takes the poison, or however he died. He reflects on his family's legacy. 3 generations of meritorious service to Qin, citing his grandfather Meng Ao and his father Meng Wu, both famous generals.
Emphasizing his loyalty, his family's loyalty?
Absolutely. He emphasizes his own position, commanding that massive army of 300,000 troops. He even states that he could rebel, he had the power, the loyalty of the troops. But he chooses death instead, to uphold righteousness, to honor the principles taught by his ancestors, and to honor the grace shown to him by the late emperor Qin Shi Huang.
So he could have fought back, but chose not to out of principle.
That's his claim. He speaks with, you can imagine, some bitterness about how his family's fate was tied so closely to Qin's success for decades, only for the young new emperor to so easily discard that legacy. He even contrasts this with the difficulty a ruler in the older Zhou dynasty would have faced, trying to eliminate a founding minister, highlighting the stark difference in the power dynamics under the centralized Qin.
That sounds like a man struggling deeply with the sheer injustice of his fate, searching for some kind of reason, some explanation for it all.
It is, and in his initial despair, he reportedly cries out, "What crime have I committed against heaven to die innocent?"
A very human cry. Why is this happening to you?
Exactly. A desperate search for meaning, for some transgression that could possibly explain such an unjust end, especially when he saw himself as loyal and virtuous.
So how does he arrive at an answer to that agonizing question? What does he conclude?
This is perhaps the most surprising and maybe the most revealing element of his final thoughts. After a long pause, reflecting intensely, he settles on what he believes is the true cause of his unjust death. Not the politics, not Zhao, not Lissy.
Okay.
He concludes that his guilt lies in severing the earth's veins, while he was building the Great Wall, and, perhaps more significantly, the straight road.
Severing the earth's veins, what does that mean?
He specifically laments leveling mountains and filling in vast ravines across the landscape during these massive construction projects. This, in his final estimation, was the attack against heaven, or against the natural order of the world, that ultimately led to his demise.
Wow, so not a political crime, not treason, but an environmental or spiritual crime, disturbing the land itself.
It is, and it delves deep into ancient Chinese cosmological beliefs. The concept of Earth's veins or demise symbolized the spiritual or vital energy flow of the land. Think of it like the land's spiritual arteries. It was partly metaphorical, representing the land's integrity and its connection to the cosmos, but it also had practical implications and beliefs surrounding activities like building or burial. There was a sense that you shouldn't disturb the earth too profoundly.
And the straight road definitely did that.
Absolutely. While the Great Wall often followed the natural topography, the Qin Straight Road was intentionally engineered to be straight, which involved unprecedented levels of earthwork, literally cutting through mountains, filling massive valleys. This kind of massive, disruptive manipulation of the landscape was viewed with deep reverence, but also a kind of apprehension.
People were wary of upsetting the natural balance.
Exactly. We know from Qin-era texts, like the Rishu or day books found in tombs, that there were various taboos and rituals related to earthwork. This reflects a widespread belief that profoundly disturbing the land's natural state could have consequences, perhaps offending spiritual forces or the cosmic order. So, in his final moments, searching for a reason beyond the immediate brutal political betrayal, Meng Tian reached for this ancient belief. He concluded that his grand projects had violated the earth itself, and that was why he was facing this end. It brought down retribution upon him.
That's fascinating. A top general and master builder attributing his own death to disturbing the natural world, rather than the actions of the emperor or the plotters who actually condemned him. It's a very different perspective.
It's a powerful psychological turn, isn't it? And it stands in really sharp contrast to Sima Qian's view of Meng Tian's death. Sima Tian, looking at the immense human cost of those projects and the sheer ruthlessness of the Qin court, had absolutely no time for explanations based on geomancy or offending heaven.
Right, Sima Qian had a much more earthly explanation. Remind us what his counterpoint was again.
Sima Qian firmly believed that Meng Tian's death was a direct, logical consequence of his political failure and his moral choices. He reiterated that Meng Tian deserved death not because he disturbed the earth, but because he failed in his fundamental duty as a high-ranking official.
His duty to advise compassion.
Exactly. He should have used his position, his influence, to advise the emperor to care for the people who were utterly exhausted by the years of war and, ironically, the forced labor on those very projects that Meng Tian oversaw. To Sima Qian, Meng Tian's end was a result of his human actions and political choices, a just outcome based on his complicity in the emperor's tyranny, not some kind of spiritual retribution for moving dirt around.
So Meng Tian sought a cosmic or spiritual explanation for his suffering, looking outward or upward, while Sima Qian saw it purely through the lens of human action, political consequence, and moral responsibility right here on Earth.
That's a key takeaway. Meng Tian's search for a reason, even perhaps inventing one like severing the Earth's veins, really underscores that deep-seated human need we all have to find explanation, to find meaning in the face of immense, seemingly unjust suffering.
Making sense of the senseless.
Right. It's a pattern you see throughout history, the need to impose order on chaos, sometimes by finding a cause where none seems apparent, maybe even blaming the victim or creating these external explanations, when the raw reality of arbitrary power or sheer misfortune is just too difficult to confront without some kind of framework or context.
Even later philosophers tried to debunk these kinds of ideas, right?
Yes. Thinkers like Wang Chong later on would try to rationally debunk such superstitious explanations, arguing for more logical causes. But rational arguments often struggle against powerful emotional and psychological needs, especially when facing death or profound injustice.
And perhaps this widespread need for an explanation for suffering, particularly the suffering of loyal or seemingly good people caught in the gears of capricious political forces, might have contributed to the later reception of certain philosophical or religious ideas in China.
It's a very compelling connection that's been suggested by some scholars. Figures like Meng Tian, and maybe even by Qi, the Qin general infamous for the massacre at Chengping, who also reportedly felt he had offended heaven for the scale of death he caused.
Right, another general meeting a bad end.
Exactly. Both powerful individuals who met unjust ends and clearly grappled with the meaning of their fates. Their struggles might have contributed to a cultural climate, a sort of philosophical questioning that was more receptive to new ideas about suffering and consequence when they arrived later.
How did Buddhism, for example, offer a different kind of explanation?
Well, the Buddhist concept of karma provided a framework that offered a seemingly comprehensive, maybe even unfalsifiable, explanation for suffering and misfortune in this life. It suggested that current suffering, even an unjust death like Meng Tian's, could be understood as the result of actions, good or bad, committed either in this life or even in previous lives.
Ah, so it provides a reason, even if that reason is rooted in the past or unseen forces.
Exactly. It provided a powerful answer to that agonizing question of why seemingly good or loyal people sometimes suffered terrible fates, filling a philosophical or emotional void that traditional Confucian or Taoist philosophies maybe didn't address in quite the same direct way when it came to individual, seemingly senseless suffering.
So Meng Tian's final, very personal attempt to explain his own death by invoking the Earth's veins might actually point towards broader cultural and psychological currents that made China receptive to new religious and philosophical ideas later on. That's quite a thought.
It is. His intensely personal search for meaning in his own death touches upon much larger historical developments regarding how people conceptualize suffering, justice, and consequence in China. It's fascinating.
His story is clearly incredibly complex, and historians haven't landed on a single, simple view of his legacy. How have others viewed him over the centuries, beyond Sima Qian's influential critique? Are there other major perspectives?
Yes, definitely. There are other significant perspectives that add more layers to the judgment, making it even more complex. We have figures like Yang Zhong, a philosopher writing relatively closer in time to the Qin Dynasty in the Han. He held a very harsh view, articulating it quite powerfully in his exemplary sayings.
Yang Zhong. Okay, what was his take?
He posed this direct, really challenging question. Meng Tian was loyal, yet executed. Is loyalty worthwhile? A fundamental question.
Oh, that cuts right to the heart of it. And what was Yang Zhong's answer to that pointed question?
Yang Zhong's answer was blunt and pretty uncompromising. No. He believed Meng Tian's loyalty was ultimately unworthy.
Unworthy? Why?
He argued that by serving the emperor and overseeing projects that moved mountains, filled valleys, built from Lintao to Liaoshui, clearly referencing the Straight Road and the Great Wall, Meng Tian effectively exhausted the people's strength while piling up corpses.
Oof, that's graphic.
It is. To Yang Zhong, The sheer human cost of Meng Tian's projects, which he undertook in loyalty to the emperor, rendered that loyalty not just valueless, but actually culpable, blameworthy. His judgment is firmly grounded in the terrible outcome for the people, regardless of Meng Tian's personal intentions or his fidelity to the ruler.
So condemnation based purely on the negative consequences of his service, even if he was just following orders loyally.
Exactly. It shifts the focus entirely away from intent or loyalty itself and onto the impact on the populace. Then, fast forward many centuries later, we have Sima Guang, the prominent historian of the Song dynasty, compiling his massive history. He offered a perspective that might be seen as more nuanced, perhaps, than either Sima Qian's or Yang Zhang's.
Sima Guang. Okay, what was his take on Meng Tian? How did he balance things?
Well, Sima Guang viewed Qin Shi Huang, without question, as a tyrant who brought immense suffering to the realm. In this context, Sima Guang saw Meng Tian as functioning primarily as the emperor's tool, like an instrument used for bad ends.
A tool of a tyrant.
Right. He argued that Meng Tian's willingness to serve Qin Shi Huang's destructive agenda, facilitating projects that caused such widespread hardship, showed a fundamental lack of benevolence, meaning he wasn't acting out of concern for the people's welfare. That was a major failing in Sima Guang's view.
Okay, so criticism there. But you said it was nuanced.
Yes, because, however, Sima Guang also found something admirable, something praiseworthy in Meng Tian's final actions. He believed Meng Tian understood a crucial aspect of a minister's duty in that specific historical context. Even when facing an unjust death order, even when completely innocent, he accepted his fate without rebelling, without showing disloyalty to the imperial authority he served.
So accepting death loyally was seen as a virtue.
Sima Guang saw this acceptance of death, this maintenance of loyalty, even in the face of utter injustice from the throne, as a form of virtue or commendable conduct within the specific context of being a minister to an absolute ruler. It showed he understood his place, even if his master was flawed.
So Sima Guang saw him as enabling tyranny and lacking benevolence because of whom he served, but also praised his ultimate adherence to the principle of loyalty right up to his death. That's a complex, almost paradoxical judgment.
It truly is, and these different perspectives, Sima Qian focusing on his failure to advise compassion, Yang Xiong condemning him for the human cost of his actions, and Sima Guang balancing his role as a tyrant's tool with his ultimate demonstration of subordinate loyalty, they collectively force us, I think, to confront the enduring moral dilemma at the very heart of Meng Tian's story.
And what is that core dilemma boiled down?
It's that fundamental question. Is loyalty inherently good? Or does its value depend entirely on what or whom that loyalty serves? What should a person of influence, a person like Meng Tian, do when their personal virtue, like loyalty to their ruler, comes into direct conflict with their own survival? Or worse, when serving the state means enabling tyranny and causing immense suffering to countless others?
Those are heavy questions.
They are. And figures like Yang Zhang and Sima Guang, they pull the discussion away from Meng Tian's own earth veins explanation, away from the cosmic, and firmly ground it in the difficult, messy, real-world consequences of one's choices when serving at the apex of power. Meng Tian's life leaves us grappling with that profound and deeply uncomfortable question.
His story, then, is just a powerful and tragic window into the realities of power in early imperial China. It really shows that even monumental achievements, things that last millennia, can be tragically undone by politics, and the demands of serving a ruthless leader can lead to impossible moral compromises.
Absolutely. Meng Tian was undeniably a brilliant general. He expanded and defended the empire. He was a master builder whose projects literally reshaped the landscape and laid infrastructure that lasted for centuries, millennia even. But he was ultimately a loyal servant, caught and destroyed by the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the very centralized state he played such a key role in building and consolidating. His story is just a stark, sobering reminder of the personal cost of living and serving under absolute power.
It truly is. He built structures intended to endure for 10,000 miles and 10,000 years, symbols of an empire's permanence. Yet his own life and the legacy of his family's generations of service were extinguished in an instant by political machination.
Gone, just like that.
It really makes you consider, does the sheer scale and impact of a person's achievements ever justify the human cost incurred in their creation? And what is the true measure of a life lived at the very pinnacle of power, especially when that power is absolute and unforgiving?
It's a question Meng Tian's story leaves hanging right there for us to ponder, isn't it? Centuries later, still relevant, still uncomfortable.
If you found this discussion useful, maybe learned something new, definitely hit that subscribe button. We do these deep dives regularly, exploring valuable ideas.
We appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.